UV unwrapping can be a bit difficult to understand, but I've done it a lot of times for a lot of characters, and I've been able to pick up on those concepts that make UV unwrapping actually very easy to understand, and that's what I'm going to show you in today's video. So the reason we do UV unwrapping is so that we can paint images or textures onto our 3D characters. And since images exist in 2D space, we want a way to be able to convert our 3D models into 2D layouts, and that's exactly what UV unwrapping does. If you still don't understand how UV unwrapping works, I'm going to explain it with this very simple illustration. So this is an example of what the UV layout for Suzanne is going to look like. And as you can see, this is laid out on a 2D space. But if I just turn down this shape key here, you can see that the UV layout directly correlates with our 3D model. I'm just going to show this again. So these are the eyes and these are the ears and this is the face. I'm just going to turn this down, and you can see how each of those separate UV layouts make up the Suzanne model. So now, how do we transfer this onto our 3D character? We are going to start out with the simple parts of the character, which are the hands and the legs. And these parts are simple to unwrap because they are basically cylinders. And the way you unwrap cylinders is just to mark one seam on any of the edge and then another seam at the top and at the bottom. So I'm going to go into edit mode on our character and let's mark those seams on the arms. So thinking about it like a cylinder, I'm going to go into the edge selection mode and then I'm going to select this loop that goes all the way around the arm and Ctrl E to bring up this edge menu where you can find the same options here. Edge, still the same options. I like to use the shortcuts because we're going to use it a lot of times. Ctrl E, and then I'm going to mark seam for the top seam, and then let's come to the bottom somewhere around here, and then Ctrl E, we are going to mark another seam for the bottom of the cylinder. And finally, we want to mark another seam that runs across the cylinder, and in this case we are going to do it in a place that is a bit hidden, so we're just going to do it under the arms. I think this loop right here should be fine, so I'm just going to select it all the way till we get to the bottom seam and Ctrl E, and then I'm going to mark seam. And just in case you're not using the mirror modifier like I'm doing here, you want to mirror these seams that you have marked over to the other side, so you can just select these seams again, and then you can press Ctrl Shift M to mirror over this selection, and then you can press Ctrl E and then mark seams. All right, so I want to select these parts that we just marked seam, so I'm going to press L, but it selects the whole character. Just want to come under here, and then we are going to limit it to the seams that we just created, and then I'm also going to select here, and then I'm going to go into face selection mode, and I'm going to hide this just so that we know that we have marked seams on the hands. So now let's do the same on the legs. We are going to select a seam for the top and another seam for the bottom. I'm also going to select it on the other side, Ctrl E and mark seam, and then we want to select another edge in a hidden spot. So I think this one right here should be fine, or this one. So I'm just going to select it all the way down to the bottom seam that we have, and I'm going to Ctrl E and mark seam. Then I'm going to mirror the selection with Ctrl Shift M and Ctrl E and mark seam. So now we have marked our seams for the leg. I'm going to select the legs, go into face select mode, and I'm going to hide this. Another part that is like a cylinder is the neck. So we're going to do the exact same thing. We are going to select seams for the top, and then we're also going to select seams for the bottom. Ctrl E and mark seams, and we want to select a seam at the back of the neck because it's not seen as much. So we're going to select a seam at the back of the neck and Ctrl E and mark seam. And now let's also hide this one. Hitch, make sure you're in face select mode, and then hitch to hide. All right, now we are left with the torso, the hands and the feet. So let's work on the torso. So the torso is really easy to mark seams. All we need to do is to separate the front side of the torso from the back side of the torso. So I'm just going to select an edge loop that runs across the torso, just like this. Also make sure to come on the bottom here and select one and Ctrl E to mark seams. Then we can mirror our selection with Ctrl Shift M, and then I'm going to also mark seams, Ctrl E, and then I'm going to mark seams. So now if I press L to select length, you can see that the front part is separate from the back part of the torso. So I'm just going to select all of the torso and hitch to hide that. Alright, so now let's work on the fingers. And the fingers are more or less like cylinders, just that they don't have any opening here. So we are just going to take them as cylinders too. So we are going to select these seams that go around the arms. I'm just going to select all of them, make sure not to miss out anyone. And finally on this one, and then Ctrl E, I'm going to mark seams. And now what we want to do is to separate the top part of the fingers from the bottom parts of the fingers. And the way we can do it is just to select an edge that runs across the whole finger. So I'm just going to select these ones like this and select them across all the fingers, all the way to this seam that we marked. And Ctrl E, I'm going to mark seam. So if I press L to select length, you can see that the top part of the finger is now separate from the bottom part. So that's good. We have marked seam for the fingers. So I'm just going to select this, make sure I'm in face select mode, and then I'm going to hide this. So the same thing for the thumb. I'm just going to select these edge loops here, Ctrl E, and then mark seam. And then I'm going to select an edge that runs across the whole finger, Ctrl E, then mark seam. And now if you select length, the top part is separate from the bottom part, and that's good. And now we can hide this, make sure you're in face select mode and hide this. And then basically we want to do the same thing for the palm. You want to separate the top side of the palm from the bottom side of the palm. So I'm just going to come to the side here. I'm going to pick this edge loop here, Ctrl E, mark seam. I'm also going to do the same here, Ctrl E, mark seam, and I'm going to add another final edge loop here, Ctrl E, mark seam. So if I select length L, you can see that the top part is separate from the bottom part. All right, that's good. I'm just going to select all of that and hide it. And I'm going to redo and select the same seams that we marked for the left side on the right side of the character, just because I don't have the mirror modifier enabled. So I'm just going to quickly do that. All right, and that's that done for the right hand. So I'm just going to select all of that and I'm going to hide it. And now we have the feet and the head remaining. So let's work on the feet, and the feet is really easy to do. If you have good topology on the feet, you should be able to select a loop that goes across the whole feet. So we're just going to separate the bottom part of the feet from the top part of the feet. So I'm going to select this loop, Ctrl E, mark seam. I want to mirror the selected loop over to the other side. So Ctrl Shift M to mirror it over, Ctrl E, and then I'm going to mark seam there. And then one thing I like to do is to just mark seam at the back of the feet, just so that the UV unwrap lays out a little bit better. So Ctrl E, mark seam. I'm going to mirror this with Ctrl Shift M and then Ctrl E, and then I'm going to mark seam. And now if you select length, you can see that the top part of the feet is separate from the bottom of the feet, and that's just what we want. So I'm going to select all of this and I'm going to hide it. And now we can focus mainly on the face, and the face is actually very simple to do. Before we work on the face, let's actually separate the ears from the face. So I'm going to select this loop that goes around the ear, Ctrl E and mark seam. Also going to make sure to mirror it over to the other side, Ctrl Shift M to mirror it over, and Ctrl E, and I'm going to mark seam right there. And what we want to do now is to separate the front side of the ear from the back side of the ear. So I'm just going to find an edge that runs across the whole ear, just like this one, and Ctrl E to mark seam. I also want to make sure to mirror it over to the other side. So Ctrl Shift M to mirror it over, Ctrl E, and then I'm going to mark seam. And now if I select length, you can see that we have separated the front side from the back side. So I'm just going to select the ear and make sure I'm in face select mode, and then I'm going to hide this. And now marking seams for the face is actually very simple. All we need to do is to select an edge that goes from the back of the head all the way to the forehead, somewhere around here. And then we're just going to mark seams on the forehead, just like this. And we are going to Ctrl E, mark seam on these edges. And we are going to see this more in action when we open up the UV layout. but this is how I usually like to mark seams for all my characters' faces. And finally, the last seams we are going to mark, you probably have an eye bag for your character. So just select a loop that separates the eye bag, then Ctrl E, mark seam. I'm going to move this over to the other side, Ctrl E and mark seam, and that's for the eye bags. And then you probably also have a mouth bag. So I'm just going to select a loop that separates the mouth bag from the face or from the main mouth, Ctrl E and mark seam. And then for the mouth bag, I want to separate the top from the bottom. So I'm just going to select an edge that runs across, and then I'm going to deselect these edges because I don't want to mark seam here. While holding down Control, just deselect these edges all the way to the corner of the mouth. Make sure that you clean up the edges that you don't want, and then Ctrl E, mark seam. I'm going to mark seam, and now if we take a look here, we have separated the top of the mouth bag from the bottom of the mouth bag. And if you also had an eye bag that is spherical, you would also want to do the same. All right, so that's basically all the seams we need to mark on our character. So I'm just going to Alt H to unhide everything, and then I'm going to split up the viewport here, and I'm going to change this to the UV editor. So to see the UV layout we created with all the seams that we just marked, all we need to do is press A and then U to bring up this UV mapping menu. You can also find it up here, but I just like to use the shortcut U, and then we are going to select Unwrap Angle Based. And I'm just going to zoom into this, and now we can see the different UV islands for the different parts that we mark seams. So this is the torso, this is the back side of the torso, these are the legs, and this is the face. So right now this UV layout is not really the best, so I'm just going to give you a checklist for making good UV layouts. So number one, you want to make sure your UVs are not overlapping each other. So let's say that this face UV was overlapped with the leg. This is a bit of an extreme example, but I'm just going to show you so that I can illustrate it better. I'm going to go into texture paint mode, and then I'm going to create a new texture slot, and I'll just leave the default settings. So let's see, we have laid out our UV map like this, and we wanted to paint textures on the leg. You're going to see that if you paint textures on the leg and the same textures are also painted on the face, just because the UVs are overlapping, I'm just going to draw this here. And you will now see that the texture painting is not really working because we have a bad UV layout. So you want to make sure that your UVs are not overlaying or overlapping on each other. The next thing you also want to ensure is to make sure that your UVs are not outside of the UV grid. So for example, if I put this UV here, I'm just going to put this face UV here, and then I'm going to go back into texture painting mode. And let's say I wanted to paint a texture somewhere around here. I'm just going to switch this to the image editor, and then I'm going to be able to paint here. So if I paint on this part of the texture, you can see that that also affected the face map, or the part of the face that is outside of the UV grid. And this is because this 1x1 UV grid is being tiled across this UV map. So whatever textures we paint here is going to be tiled here, and so therefore it's going to show on any UVs that's here. So a rule of thumb in general is just to make sure that your UVs don't overlap or don't go outside the UV grid. And you also want to make sure to leave a bit of space between the UV grid and your UV maps. All right, the third thing that we're going to look at is to arrange the UVs in same order of the character. I'm just going to explain this here. So on our character, we have the head as the top, and then we have the neck, then we have the torso, then we have the legs, arms on the left side, and also the arms on the right side. So this order is the same way we want to lay out our UV maps. So I'm just going to delete this image texture here, and I'm going to try to explain this for you. So for the head, I'm just going to select the head, and we want the head to be somewhere around here. We want the head to start out the UV layout. So I'm just going to place this somewhere around here. So then next under the head should be the neck. I'm going to select the neck, and then I'm just going to move this here. So it should be under the neck. And I'm just going to go ahead and arrange the UVs in same order of the character. All right, so this is what the UV maps look like, just laid out in a much logical order. So we have the head corresponding at the top, we have the neck which is below the head, we have the torso, the back of the torso, then we have the legs to the side, we also have the left arm and the right arms, and the fingers. Everything is just placed out much more logically, so that in case we are sending this over to another person, it's just much easier to understand the UV layouts. You might also want to make your UVs as symmetrical as possible. Right now, I've laid them out by hand, but if you wanted to make sure that your UVs are symmetrical from the left side to the right side, here's something you can do. I'm just going to go back into object mode, and then I'm going to use the auto mirror add-on to add a mirror modifier to my character. And you shouldn't really be adding the mirror modifier if you already have like vertex groups or shape keys that might be affected. So just make sure to keep that in mind. For me, I don't have any of those, so I'm just going to add in the mirror modifier. And if I go back into edit mode, you can see that all our UVs are now in half. So for these ones that are in the middle here, I just want to make sure that they are directly placed on this line right here. So I'm just going to use the 2D cursor to help me do that. I'm going to go up to view, and I'll change the location of the 2D cursor to 0.5, which is the middle of the UV map. And then I'm going to select these edges, just these ones that are supposed to be in the center. And then I'm also going to change the pivot point to the 2D cursor, SX, and just scale it to 0 on the x-axis. And then you might notice this flyway vertex, and the way we are going to fix that, I'll go back into the face selection mode. I'm going to select these faces here, just going to shift H to hide them. Then I'm going to draw this one back, and then also the same for here. Just going to select these faces, shift H to hide them. And then back in the vertex select mode, we're going to move this back here, and Alt H to unhide everything. And now to mirror the UV map, I'm just going to minimize this tab, and then we're going to come to the modifier, and under data, we just want to check where it says mirror U, you just want to check the mirror U, and then you can go back into object mode and then apply your mirror modifier. And if we tap back into edit mode, you can see that our UV maps are placed completely symmetrically, except for the torso, because the torso were not really in the middle. So we are just going to individually select this, and then we are going to manually place the torso. So I'm just going to U, make sure I'm in face select mode, U, unwrap angle based, and then I'm going to scale this back into place, just like this. Alright, and that's how you can create completely symmetrical UV maps. And the final thing you want to keep in mind is to maintain a uniform texture density across all your UVs. And this just means that each UV layout should have the same scale. And the way you check this inside of Blender, I'm just going to go into object mode. I'm going to split the viewport here, and then I'm going to change this to the shader editor, and I'm just going to remove this for now, and I'm going to add in a checker texture. Plug in the color from the checker texture to the base color, and then with Node Wrangler add-on enabled, just press Ctrl T to bring up the texture coordinates and mapping nodes. And then you want to plug the UV coordinates into the vector to make sure that we are using the UV coordinates. And now I'm just going to go into material preview nodes, and then I'm also going to increase the scale here. And what we want to make sure for the texture density is just to make sure that for each separate UV layer that we have the same size of grid. So at this point, if the square sizes are not the same, you just want to go back to your UV map and adjust these UV maps the way you see fit. And at this point, you also want to minimize stretching like this. So there's a bit of stretching on the chest. So something you could do is just to add in an extra seam that goes around here. I'm just going to add in one that goes around this way, and then Ctrl E, and then I'm going to max in. I'm going to move it over to the other side, Ctrl E and max in, and then we can unwrap these separately. So I'm just going to select link, U, and then I'm going to unwrap, and then we're going to scale this down so that it matches the texture density of the remaining parts. And something like that looks fine. To also minimize stretching like this on the face, I'm just going to select the face, and then I'm going to U, unwrap, to bring up the unwrap menu, and then I'm going to choose unwrap minimum stretch, and that will unwrap the face with minimum stretching. I'm just going to put this back into place. I'm going to move it up, and I'm going to scale it down to make sure we have the same texture density with all the other parts of the body. So you can see that we have been able to minimize stretching on the face. Also on the feet, there's a bit of stretching on the toes. So what you can do is just to select this UV layout and U, and then unwrap with minimum stretching. And then I'm going to scale this down, bring this here. So I'm just going to go in and adjust the sizes and scale of these UV maps so that I think I have an even texture density across the whole character. And this is what the UV map looks like after I've adjusted it to have proper texture density across every part of the character. And what this ensures is that if you are texture painting, this ensures that all parts of the character will have the same resolution, and that's really good if you want to have proper texture painting. And that wraps it up for this tutorial. I'll catch you guys in the next one.